Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be exploring this fascinating idea of mind patterns. You know, that feeling of being stuck, like repeating the same mistakes even after you swore you'd change.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking at Richard Klepper's work. And he argues there's actually like a deeper structure to this. It's almost like a mental programming.
It's fascinating how Klepros connects these patterns all the way back to like our very first relationships, like
Mhm.
especially with our parents. And it's not even just about like specific events, but more like the repeated emotional dynamics. It's like that really shapes how we react to everything, the world.
So it's less about like one time your dad yelled at you for a bad grade or something like that.
That's
It's
true.
more about like the overall pattern of either seeking approval or maybe even avoiding conflict.
Yeah, exactly.
And these patterns, they become almost subconscious, right?
Exactly. It's amazing how Klepras uses the analogy of like riding a bike.
Yeah.
So the more you ride a bike, the less you have to think about all that stuff, like the
Ah,
balance and steering and all that. It just becomes automatic.
right.
And it's very similar with our early reactions to emotional situations. They
Yeah.
kind of become these ingrained mind patterns.
Okay, so we've got these patterns playing out under the surface, but like, what are they even made of? What's the structure Klepras is talking about?
Well, he breaks it down into like three main components. So you have pictures or images, you've got sounds, and then you have feelings.
Okay.
And this is where it gets really, really interesting. Klepros argues that feelings are actually the most powerful element.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're like the engine that drives the impact of the pattern.
So even if we like try to logically change our thoughts, if that underlying feeling is still there, we're likely to just get pulled back into that same old pattern.
Precisely. It's like, think about a time when you heard a song that was associated with like a past relationship, maybe one that ended badly. Even if you've like logically moved on,
Mm,
you know,
right.
that song can instantly bring back all those old feelings, like maybe heartbreak or even anger.
That's such a good point. It's like proof that logic alone just isn't enough to break these patterns. So what does Klepper say about the power of like our subconscious in all of this?
Well, he links it to this idea of the law of attraction. So this idea that what we consistently focus on in our subconscious, we tend to actually like draw into our lives.
Mm.
Like, if our dominant mind patterns are always like, filled with fear and scarcity or negativity, well, guess what? You
Wow.
might be subconsciously like attracting more of those experiences.
Okay, so like if I'm constantly worried about money, even if I'm like working hard and doing all the right things, that underlying fear might actually be contributing to more financial struggles.
That's the idea Klepros is exploring.
Yeah.
He suggests that shifting our internal state is key to changing our external reality. And this is where he gets really controversial, especially when he starts talking about traditional education.
Oh, yeah, because if we're already forming these patterns in childhood, like how much does our education play into reinforcing them?
Exactly. And Klepros is very critical of education systems that emphasize things like rote learning and obedience
Hmm.
over like creativity and critical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He argues that kind of environment can actually like create mind patterns that are just rooted in fear of failure. And that, of course, limits our potential.
That's a really thought-provoking point. It's like we're being conditioned to stay within certain boundaries instead of exploring what we're truly capable of.
And that leads us to, I think, really central point that Klepros makes, which is that we are not powerless against these patterns. He uses this analogy of like being surrounded by all these ladders, each one like representing a problem that might come from different sources. Our parents, society, our own past choices.
Okay.
And it's like we're surrounded by these ladders,
Yeah.
these problems, but we always have a choice of whether to climb them or not. Right. So we can stay stuck on those ladders, or we can climb down and we can start charting our own course. He believes that true power lies within us, not in those external factors that might have shaped our past.
It's like we're not just a product of our circumstances. We actually have the power to choose a different path.
Exactly. And that brings us to, I think, like the really exciting part, which is how do we actually change these ingrained patterns? How do we reprogram?
Because it's one thing to understand all this in theory, but what about the practical steps to actually shifting those deep-seated patterns?
Right. That's what we are going to,
That's what we're going to dive into next.
exactly.
I think this is a good place to pause.
Yeah.
And when we come back, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of how to actually apply all of this incredible information. Okay, so we've established these mind patterns. They're rooted in our early experiences, and they can have huge impact on our lives, from our relationships to our finances, even our career choices. But Klepros doesn't just leave us with like a diagnosis. He actually offers a way out, a path to like rewriting these programs.
Yeah, and that's where this concept of subconscious reprogramming comes in. So Klepros suggests that we can consciously replace those negative or limiting beliefs with positive and empowering ones. It's almost like you're going into like the control panel of your mind and just updating the software.
Okay, that sounds amazing in theory, but how do we actually do that? Is it like some kind of mental boot camp where you just force yourself to think positive thoughts all the time?
It's not quite that simple.
Mm.
Klepros talks about tapping into the power of our subconscious mind, not just our conscious thoughts. One technique he really emphasizes is using affirmations.
Oh, okay. So those positive statements that we repeat to ourselves.
Right, exactly. Like, I am worthy or I am abundant, that sort of thing.
Right, right. But I've tried affirmations before, and honestly, sometimes they feel a bit cheesy. Like I'm just saying the words without really believing them.
And that's exactly the key point Klepros makes. It's not just about mindlessly repeating phrases. He emphasizes the importance of actually embodying the feeling of the affirmation, really connecting with it on a deeper level, like an emotional level.
So it's not just about thinking it, but actually feeling it.
Exactly. He suggests like visualizing the outcome that you desire, feeling those emotions that are associated with it as you repeat the affirmation. Like imagine yourself actually living in that reality,
Yeah.
feeling confident, successful, loved, whatever it is that you're aiming for.
It's almost like creating a mini movie in your mind, a vision of yourself actually living out those affirmations.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. He also suggests writing affirmations down, speaking them out loud, even recording them and listening back to them regularly. The idea is to create multiple pathways for those affirmations to really like seep into your subconscious.
Hmm. It's like we're surrounding ourselves with those positive messages, so they actually become part of like our internal landscape.
Exactly. And Klepros doesn't stop there. He also highlights the power of visualization,
Yeah.
which is similar to affirmations, but it involves creating these really vivid mental pictures of our desired outcomes.
So it's like daydreaming with a purpose.
Yeah, you could say that. But the key again is to engage all of your senses. So don't just see the outcome, but hear it, feel it, even smell, and taste the experience you want to create. Make it as real as possible in your mind's eye.
Wow, that sounds incredibly powerful. It's like we're giving our subconscious a blueprint for our future.
Exactly. And to make it even more tangible, Klepros suggests creating these vision boards with images and words that represent like all our goals and dreams and aspirations.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about those. It's like creating a physical representation of our desires, something we can see and interact with every day.
Exactly. It helps to keep your focus on what you want to actually manifest in your life.
This is all so fascinating, but to be honest, it also sounds like a lot of work. I can already see myself getting overwhelmed with all these techniques. Where do we even begin?
Well, Klepros emphasizes that it's not about doing everything all at once. He suggests starting with like one or two practices that really resonate with you and just start small. Consistency is way more important than quantity.
Okay, so it's about taking baby steps and gradually incorporating these practices into our daily routine.
Exactly. He reminds us that this is a journey, not a destination. It's about making these small but consistent changes over time that will ultimately lead to these really profound transformations.
It sounds like it's about cultivating like a new way of being, a new way of relating to ourselves and like the world around us. But what about those times when we inevitably slip up, when we fall back into old patterns? How do we deal with that?
That's where self-compassion comes in. Klepros really emphasizes the importance of being kind to ourselves, being understanding with ourselves,
Mm.
especially when we stumble or we fall back into old habits.
Because let's be honest, we're all human. We're all going to make mistakes. It's part of the process, right?
Absolutely. And Klepros reminds us that those mistakes are actually really valuable learning opportunities. They
Yeah.
can help us to identify those areas where we need to grow and evolve.
So instead of beating ourselves up over it, we can choose to view those stumbles as stepping stones on our path.
Exactly. And this is where gratitude comes in.
Gratitude. How does that fit into all of this?
Well, Klepros believes that cultivating a sense of gratitude can really profoundly shift our energy. When we focus on what we're grateful for, it helps us to move out of this state of lack and into a state of abundance.
It's like we're shifting our attention from what we don't have to what we do have, recognizing all the good that's already present in our lives.
Exactly. And that simple shift can have this ripple effect, it can affect all areas of our lives.
Yeah.
He suggests things like keeping a gratitude journal, writing down things you're thankful for each day, no matter how big or small they are.
It sounds like a great way to train our minds to just focus on the positive, to really Notice all those little blessings that we might otherwise take for granted.
Exactly. And Klepros even suggests, like, expressing that gratitude to others, whether it's through a heartfelt thank you or even just like a random act of kindness.
So gratitude is not just an internal practice. It's about extending that positive energy outward, sharing it with the people around us.
Yes. He believes that when we express gratitude, it creates a positive feedback loop, so it amplifies the good in our lives and even in the world around us.
This is all so inspiring, but I'm curious to hear more about the practical side of things. Like, how can we actually apply these concepts to create like real change in our lives? Where do we even start?
Klepros is very clear that it's not enough to just understand these concepts intellectually. We need to embody them and put them into practice in our daily lives. He suggests starting with small, manageable steps.
Okay, so like pick a specific goal, a specific pattern we want to shift.
Exactly. Identify one area of your life where you really want to see change, and then break that goal down into smaller, actionable steps.
It's like creating a roadmap for our own transformation.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
Yeah.
He also stresses the importance of accountability.
Accountability, what does that mean in this context?
Well, it means having those support systems in place to help us stay on track, whether it's like a therapist or a coach, or even just a supportive friend or family member, maybe even an online community. Having someone to share our goals with and who can hold us accountable can make a huge difference.
It's like having a cheerleader in our corner, someone to encourage us when we're feeling discouraged and to celebrate our wins along the way.
Exactly. And Klepros also recommends creating a plan for overcoming obstacles. Because let's be real, there are going to be challenges along the way.
Absolutely. Life happens. We need to be prepared for those inevitable bumps in the road.
Right. So Klepros encourages us to actually anticipate those challenges and think of strategies for dealing with them.
So it's about being proactive, not reactive, thinking ahead and having a plan in place for when things get tough.
Precisely. He suggests brainstorming potential obstacles and coming up with solutions ahead of time.
So it's like having a toolkit for navigating those inevitable bumps in the road.
That's a great analogy. And he also emphasizes the importance of celebrating our successes along the way.
Because acknowledging our progress, no matter how small, can be incredibly motivating.
Exactly. He encourages us to reward ourselves for our efforts, no matter how small they may seem.
It's like giving ourselves a pat on the back for every step we take in the right direction. Acknowledging that we're making progress, even if it's not always perfect.
Yes. He believes that celebrating our wins, no matter how small, really helps to reinforce those positive changes and keeps us moving forward on our journey.
This has been such an empowering conversation, and I have no doubt that our listeners are feeling really inspired to start their own journeys of transformation. But before we wrap things up, I'm curious to hear what Klepros has to say about like the bigger picture, like the impact of these individual transformations on the world as a whole.
That's a great point. Let's explore that in our final segment.
Okay, so we talked about how these mind patterns work and how they actually form, and even like some practical techniques for, shifting them. But I'm really curious about like what Klepros says about the bigger picture. Does he connect all of this personal work to like creating a better world?
He absolutely does. Yeah. In fact, I think one of the most inspiring parts of his work is how he emphasizes that these individual transformations actually contribute to a collective shift in consciousness.
Okay, so it's not just about like self-improvement, it's actually about creating like a ripple effect that impacts the world around us.
Exactly. It's like, it uses this analogy of a pond. So if you throw a pebble into like a still pond, it creates these ripples that spread outward and they end up affecting the entire surface.
Right.
And in the same way, he argues that as more and more individuals kind of like awaken to their own power and they start to consciously shift those mind patterns, it creates this ripple effect that actually raises the vibration of all humanity.
That's a beautiful image. It suggests that even our like small personal efforts can contribute to something so much larger than ourselves.
Yeah, and that brings us back to this idea of personal responsibility. Klepros is really clear that we can't just blame our parents or our past or society for our current situation. We actually have the power to choose how we respond to those experiences, how we shape our reality.
So it's about like taking ownership of our own lives and recognizing that we have the power to create change, both within ourselves and in the world.
Exactly. And while that can feel kind of daunting at first, Klepros argues that true freedom actually comes from stepping into that power, from like realizing that we're not just victims of our circumstances, but that we are active creators.
It's like we're taking the driver's seat of our own lives. We're choosing the destination and we're charting our own course.
That's a great analogy, yeah. And he acknowledges that it's not always going to be easy. There will be challenges and setbacks, times when we fall back into those old patterns. But he reminds us that all of that is just part of the journey.
It's about embracing the ups and downs, knowing that even those difficult moments are actually opportunities for us to grow.
Exactly. And that's where self-compassion, I think, becomes so essential. We need to be kind to ourselves throughout this process, recognizing that transformation takes time and it takes effort.
It's about treating ourselves with the same kindness and understanding that we would offer to a loved one who's going through something challenging.
Absolutely. And Klepros reminds us that this whole journey of transformation is ultimately about aligning with our true selves, about becoming the most authentic and empowered versions of ourselves.
And by doing that, but each of us doing that inner work, we actually contribute to a more conscious and more loving world.
That's the beautiful paradox that Klepros highlights. So by focusing on our own individual growth, we actually create this ripple effect that benefits everyone.
This has been such a thought-provoking deep dive.
Mhm.
As we wrap up, what one key takeaway would you like to leave our listeners with?
I think the most important thing to remember is that we have the power to choose. We can choose to stay stuck in those old patterns or, to blame our past, to let fear kind of control our lives. Or we can choose to step into our power, embrace change, and create a life that's truly aligned with our true selves. And by doing that, we actually contribute to a world where everyone has the opportunity to do the same. The choice really is always ours.
That's such an empowering reminder. So as you go about your day, dear listeners, ask yourself, what one mind pattern would you like to change? And what small step can you take today to start shifting it? And if you found this deep dive intriguing, be sure to explore more of Richard Klepros's work. You won't be disappointed. Until next time, keep diving deep.